Hey guys, this is Aaron with Overland, Nevada. Got Mike behind the camera now. I wish I had an actual camera to cut to the new camera he got, but from this point on, if anything, the watchability of our videos are going to be a little better.
The content's not going to be any better, but the, the video quality's going to be better.
We're still going to be a couple idiots doing stuffed old trucks. That's just it. Okay, so what I've got here is an alternator from a 1995 Cadillac DeVille with windshield heater. I honestly can't tell you why that's important, but there's some people that did some research prior to that know it is. Okay, so I'm just going off of some prior research done that I found on t4r.org from Doc 2012. That's his username. So look up that thread. We can we'll reference it in the YouTube description. But anyway, so this is a 140 amp alternator. Mike, what are the standard in the 4Runner?
I think they're like 90 tops or something like that.
Okay, so I've read 80, I think.
Yeah, it's somewhere. It's under
90,
100.
So, anyways, this alternator is going into my 1999 SR5 4Runner. Mine happens to be going out, and so that's what we're gonna do now. There's a few things we're gonna highlight through this. Another description we're gonna put in the box is where we bought this handy dandy adapter, wiring adapter. It takes the wiring from the 4Runner wiring harness to the Chevy alternator wiring. I know that's gonna make a lot of Toyota guys cringe, but hey, you know, it's an easy alternator to get if you have any problems with it. I bought mine from AutoZone. It's the Duralast Gold. It'll be easy to replace if I ever have to deal with it, rather than trying to get an AC Delco or something like that. So that's why I went AutoZone, but that's what we're gonna do. So first we're gonna start by, we'll cut to in a second, but we're gonna start by just disconnecting all the electrical, and then we'll get in there and start showing you guys what's going on. Okay, so obviously you're dealing with the alternator, which is charging the battery, so it's directly connected to the power system, so you want to disconnect the battery. Honestly, it's wise to disconnect the battery when you're doing anything in the truck, but I'm pretty bad about that myself, but this one you want to. Excuse me, I got a kid that needs a screwdriver.
What's up, Isaac?
I'm a goose hammer.
Isaac's our helper today.
One.
Hey,
we can't do anything in Overland, Nevada without having one of the little monsters around, but that's okay. That's what we like.
why don't you go fix the trailer?
Go here.
Oh, that's
good.
Yeah,
that's another common thing with these old Toyotas. I've had to replace mine a couple times.
So just like Mike said, I've actually been dealing with a lot of corrosion on this battery, and I'm starting to blame it on this connector, because I had other issues on our other vehicles doing the same, and when I put the military spec battery terminal on it, it just stopped doing it. So that's going to happen today too. So the top bolt right here is a 14 millimeter. Right now, we're just gonna loosen it. We're gonna go to the bottom bolt. Actually, that bottom one is the nut. So we're gonna loosen that so that we can then get to the adjuster, which the adjuster bolt is on the front side of the alternator here, this where my hand's pointing, on the front side of the bracket. That, once we start pulling that back, will loosen the tension on the belt, and once we get the tension off the belt, obviously we can pull the belt off. And depending on the last time you've been in your truck, this all should be really easy. I did a timing belt, gosh, it feels like just maybe last year, but even since then I've done head gaskets stuff, and so you can see there's we're not going to be able to get a camera angle on it, but this adjuster hooks on the bracket. So it's a long bolt that hooks on the bracket. So once you get it loose enough, you actually lift the bolt up. It doesn't come off. Lift the bolt up and put it over that little hook on the bracket, and then you can push the alternator in. We can just leave the belt hanging there out of the way. Just make sure that when you're putting everything back together that you didn't knock the belt off of any other pulleys when you go to put it back on, so that you don't have any belt trauma when you go to start it. Okay, so I've already loosened this plastic piece. Actually, I think I broke it, and you'll probably break yours if you do this. But this plastic piece comes off, and I might be able to salvage it, at least for now. But once I put the big 3 in, that's a no-go anyways. Sorry about that. But there's there's a 10mm nut right here that holds the charging cable onto the alternator. So we're gonna undo that, and once we pull this alternator out, we'll set them side by side and kind of go over what wires went where and what wires are gonna go where.
Maybe a little pry bar right out of that boulder there.
Handy. Okay. Son's not about to run off with some stranger, is he?
No,
oh,
not you.
I forgot. There's the bolt on the bottom. That needs to come out. This is what holds it to the adjustment bracket. Okay, so while you have accessibility and there's not any tension on this wiring harness, you'll want to go ahead and pull this 3-wired plug off the back of your alternator. Voltage controller, I assume, and other stuff, grounding, whatever. I don't really know. And then, like you saw, it just falls out. Now, when I first got this dude in the mail, I pulled it out of the box, and I was a little freaked out all of a sudden because you can see the difference there. It's quite different. I'm going to take it to the bench here for a second so I can show you something. Okay, so I just showed you guys the difference in the size. Mass-wise, this alternator is much bigger. Like Doc 2012 already showed in his truck, this will fit. There's a good chance that if you have an extended filter or a oversized filter, you might have to go down to the stock one. Now, if you look up on the computer, the 4Runner oil filter, it's the YZZD1. That's what you'll get. However, the YZZD3 is popular because it's a bit longer. I run this filter, so I'll know real quick whether or not this filter length will work, and we'll note that as we go. But we don't know yet, so we'll cover that stuff in a minute. There's also another thing that you'll have to do. Okay, so if you look right here, you see the width of these brackets for the alternator are 2 different sizes. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to have a stack of washers that will fill in the gap to make sure that this fits snugly inside that stock adapter. Okay, so this alternator, this is where the charging wire is on this alternator, and then the charging wire for this alternator is on the back. So it looks like diameter wise that little plastic cover might be used. You can still be used. You might want to have to throw it. If you break it, maybe it's just a small zip tie around the wire, and the cover will hold it in. If you plan on doing the big 3, which I will eventually, then you'll have another wire come out of this, so that will be useless anyways. So another route, maybe a battery terminal cover, standard battery terminal cover will work well there. But anyway, so and then we have the plug. This is the adapter piece. As you can see, this is what's going to plug into the stock wiring harness, and then this plugs in, which I won't do now, but then this plugs in right there, and it cleans that up. Now, many guys have just spliced wires, and if you go to the thread that I've referenced, there are 2 guys that have already given you the color codes on which one goes where, and you can splice the wires if you want. For 20 bucks, I like the idea of this. It's clean. I'm not having to get inside the truck and do butt splices, which my OCD can't live with anyways without solder and heat shrink. So trying to do that inside the truck is worth the 20 bucks. Another site sells these for 30. I got these off eBay. I'll have a link in the description for these as well. Okay, so I've already started bending these, and show a little video on that in just a second. I'll use this audio for that. I just have some rubber grip pliers that work well for that. As you can see, it just flattened right out. You could probably just break those all the way off for the sake of not having anything hanging out, but I think they'll be fine.
We're bending those so that they fit over the
post here.
Post on there, yeah.
See, on the other post, they would slide around down there, and that's not going to happen. But while we have it out, I'm going ahead and running the wire for the big 3. So this will go straight to the battery. Because once I get this alternator in, getting back behind the alternator to do the big 3, it looks like, I don't know this for a fact, but it looks like you'll have to take the whole thing out to do it. So these things are just so big compared to the stock. Here we got this wiring harness we got off eBay. We'll go ahead and check that out. And
that's a clean way to do that.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the way to go. So that slides on nicely, clipped in well. And the nice thing about this is, because if you'll have to buy these 2 connectors anyways, unless you cut this off. The downside of cutting this off is if you have to go back to a stock alternator for some reason, selling the truck or whatever, you've then cut off the stock wiring harness, and that's going to be a pain in the butt in the future. So I think it's worth the 20 bucks, because I can't imagine you'll probably spending 5 bucks on each connector anyways to do the splicing. So this seems like the right way to do it.
And this really, it actually gives you the ability to run 2 different alternators if you need to, you know. And when we're out in Nevada, we roll through some small towns, and sometimes they don't have one particular part, but maybe they've got another particular part. This gives us 2 options for alternators in a pinch if we were to lose one on the trail.
So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try to get it in a spot where I can connect the wiring prior to dropping it in there. I think
make it easy on yourself.
I think it will be easier to do it like this than to do it after it's bolted up. Okay, so what I did right here is I indexed the wires to where they're running parallel with the 3-prong post on the back of the Chevy alternator. And so I'm going to tighten that down now. We'll see how, what we'll do is we'll get this fitted, and we'll see if that works based on what the visual I just did, it will. And it seems like a 14 millimeter socket works fine on that nut. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is, now that we have the wiring tight, we're going to put the alternator up in place and kind of hang it off of this top bolt, but we're not going to shove the top bolt in all the way, because what we have to do, as you can see, there's a gap right here that we have to space with washers. So I have 3, I'll need 4, but I have 3 that I tacked together. The 4th one fell off, so I'm just going to put that in last. Okay, and you can put these in one by one, but as many takes as it's taken so far that you'll never see, this might be the way to do it. So I will push those in as well as possible, and then back it out just a little bit so that I can slide this last one in place. And then once it's in line, just pop that bolt in and we should be good. So okay, so now that we have the top bolt threaded in, we're keeping it loose. What we want to do now is we got to get the adjustment bracket up with the adjustment nuts and bolts. So you can put that back on the same way that you took it off the stock alternator, and once you start getting it tight, you may have to loosen this wiring harness off to the side so that you can get in there and actually make some adjustment. Just get everything snug. Once you get everything snug, go back to the lower bracket bolt, that's back on the block of the engine, and tighten that up. Again, the biggest issue there is actually finding it blindly. So you want to make sure that that lower bracket is all the way up the way it's supposed to be. You have the adjustment bolt that goes through a piece on the bracket like this. So what you want to do is make sure that that bracket is all the way up around the rim of that bolt. Once you get there and you get it all snug, you can tighten down the bolt that holds the bracket to the block of the engine. And be wise to double check that as you go to make sure that it doesn't walk on you a little bit as you tighten everything up. And just FYI, there is a wiring harness that runs right in front of that bolt, so you have to really work around it to get the socket on that head. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to get it good and snug, and I'll come back and tighten it down real tight once we get everything in place. Okay, so wiring is all in. The alternator is in place. What we need to do now is I need to loosen, because I had it tightened up pretty far, so I need to loosen the adjustment bolt so that I can get the belt on. Okay, so this is a tagline to the original video we did concerning the CS144 alternator. Everything applies, and up till this point, what I've decided to do for added clearance behind the alternator and the engine block, and then because of that, there'll be added clearance between the back of the alternator and the oil filter, which is close as it is. Like I was saying, I have the YZ DD3 or whatever it's called. Yeah, so sorry, the YZZD3 filter. This is a longer filter, like we had mentioned already. It's longer than the YZZD1 filter, which typically comes in these trucks. I'm hoping to be able to pull that filter without having to pull the alternator by doing this. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the alternator belt out and I'm putting in a power steering, four-ribbed power steering belt that I took off my truck a while back. See, I actually marked it when I was doing the timing belt and stuff for like a trail spare essentially. So I'm going to be using this. It's a little bit longer, like I said. So what that does is that added length will allow the alternator, which I can't do with one hand, swing out a little bit further, maybe by a half an inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch, somewhere like that. Might be just enough for what I need to clear the oil coolant hose, and then, like I said, hopefully the oil filter will be able to come off and on without any problems. Adding in that big 3 wiring upgrade, kind of like we mentioned already, kind of had made some issues on the back side of this alternator as far as where the wires have to be clocked so that they're not hitting between the filter and the alternator, especially when you're swinging it back to get the belt over it. So that's one issue. And then once you get it all in line, those wiring, that whole wiring harness and everything kind of gets in the way of the filter as well. So right now I have it clocked to where hopefully that won't be an issue. I think there's physically no way for me to show you on camera how that looks. I'll try here in a minute. But so what I did is I loosened the belts from the tensioners. Power steering tensioner is, let's get down in there, is right there. So you loosen that front bolt, and then you loosen this top bolt, and then you can turn that adjuster, which is the back side of that long bolt there. That will loosen the belt so that you can pull that off. Then you get underneath. It's best to get underneath the truck and do it, but you can get down to this idler pulley, loosen that front nut, and then from the bottom, which I don't know, right there we go. From the bottom there's the tensioning bolt. So once you get those off, I went ahead and took the fan off because it made it a little easier. Wasn't too bad, and I think I'm gonna swap out clutch fans anyways while I have it. So I'm not gonna video this whole thing, but I'm gonna go back over it as I go, kind of maybe piece by piece. But that is hopefully my solution. Okay, so I got everything back together. I went on ahead and took out my old clutch fan. My truck's been running warm for a little while, and everything's been swapped: hoses, water pump, thermostat, coolant, all that stuff, except for that fan. So I went ahead and did that while I had everything back out, but got all the belts back tight. The good news about using that power steering belt is that now if you reach back behind the alternator here, you can feel where the heater hose or the coolant hose for the oil runs. You can stick your fingers between the two, and that is a very, very, very good thing. That was one of my biggest concerns about running this so far. Now obviously the second thing is the oil filter, so I'm going to cut to that in just a second and see if we can get a visual on that. Okay, sorry for the shaky camera, whatnot, but now that I look back here, this is the D3, YZZ D3 filter, and it looks like now I have enough clearance to thread that off and put the same one back on. So that is great news. You can see how I've clocked the charging wire that goes straight to the battery. That is kind of a must, I think, if you want to be able to get the filter on and off. You can see right at the base of that, where the heat shrink starts on that wire, there's a post. There's 3 posts actually. Those get complicated too. I think maybe if you wanted, you could probably cut those off and maybe cover them with plastic dip or something, so that they're just completely out of the way. I think that would help with clocking the wires where you need them to be. I didn't do that because I didn't want to take it out again, quite honestly. So I feel like this is now a success. Power steering pump, hose, or belt is imperative as far as I'm concerned. I've read guys running both ways, but with heat and engine movement, all that stuff, I can't stand things touching, and if they are touching, then I like to cover them, similar to the way I have this piece covered here. But anyways, so that should be it on the CS144 upgrade. I think it's going to be a good upgrade now. I'm going to fire this up and make sure it's running. If we run into other problems, I will definitely talk about them. Okay, so also I changed my terminals to where they're all these military spec terminals. I got a main power running to a breaker here. And this breaker then has 2 feeds. The what is that, a 6-gauge feed goes all the way to the back to a distribution block in the back for a pump and for an inverter, which is grounded to the frame. That was one of the big reasons why the big 3 was important, because otherwise I had, you can see here, this little 8-gauge wire as the final ground for the actual power to all that. So adding in the big 3, which I have running down around to the front side of the battery, and then you can see it goes down to the frame, then up from the frame, zip tied to that wiring harness, and then just over to the engine block. So yeah, that's it for the big 3 on my end. If you guys have any questions on that, feel free to holler at me.